they now live in Peachtree City. Bonnie completed the Fayette County Extension Master Gardener Program in 2005 and served as an extension volunteer for 8 years. Currently, Bonnie is a member of the Peachtree City Garden Club and the Art of Landscaping Garden Club in Fayetteville. She writes the monthly garden articles and occasionally features travel pieces for Southern Woman magazine, which is formerly known as the Fayette Woman magazine. Bonnie loves nature and hiking and is a proud graduate of the University of Georgia and avid supporter of the Bulldog Nation. We welcome Bonnie Healy.
Testing, can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, technology drives me crazy. It's my biggest fear when I go somewhere, we'll never get the technology to work because it's all pictures. Does everybody have a handout for today? We got Carol. Well, we can also pass them out at the end if you want. You want to do them later? Yeah, okay. Well, that way you won't get to cheat. You'll have to just listen to me. We're going to talk about fabulous focal points in the garden, or how to add personality to your garden. All of us want a beautiful garden, but have you ever gone to certain gardens and you think, what makes this so special, so spectacular? And generally, it's not just the plants, it's the design of the garden, how the garden draws you in. So there are a lot of different design tips that can help you to have a more fabulous garden. We're going to look at just one design tip today, and that is how to add a focal point, or 2, or 3, or 4. A definition, what is a focal point? It is a place for your eye to rest and savor and enjoy something interesting. Now, if you think about the scope of outside, if you think about the scope of a garden, it's a massive space, generally. Some of you may have small patio gardens. But you have to have a way for people's eye to stop and savor something of interest. And that's what a focal point does. It says, this is interesting, stop and look at me. When you add focal points, and we'll talk about what a focal point can be, you've got to ask yourself, what do I want to accomplish with a focal point? You just don't throw a statue out anywhere and willy-nilly in the garden. You want to have it accomplish something in the garden. So we're going to look at a couple of things that a focal point can accomplish. One of the things it can do is liven up a featureless monochromatic space. Does anybody recognize this space? It was the entrance to the old children's garden at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, and they've redone that garden, but this is in the winter. Now, would that be very appealing? What gives it some appeal even in the winter? You've got the fountain, the whimsical fountain. So in other words, it gives you something to look at as you just traverse through there to get going with the garden. It can liven up the space. This is a friend of mine in Columbus. They actually had this space here where they used to park their car, and so they kind of had this, they closed it off and they have kind of this fence that's sort of nondescript. So they massed plants there to give you something more appealing to look at. In this space, you've got a dry creek bed, which in itself is charming. But adding the bridge, can you see how that makes your eyes stop and it gives it so much more appeal? The bridge is not only functional, and actually my husband built this for a friend, the bridge for a friend, and she wanted it just as wide as her little lawnmower. So she can go over the, so it really, it's functional, very beautiful, and it adds a really nice, charming addition. If you've got a wall of ivy, are you going to even notice that as you walk by? But what did this homeowner do? They added a collection of watering cans. So as you're walking through the garden, it gives you something charming to look at. Again, when you have a wall and you've got a lot of greenery, adding something that directs you into the garden adds some personality, even if it's just terracotta pots filled with herbs. It really makes a statement. And I love this. There was this building, it's just all brown wood, and they use the same colors, but they livened up the space by massing those pots together, and makes that really interesting to look at. One of my friends in Fayetteville, she decided she'd just make artwork on her fence. She thought the fence was kind of drab, so she just painted a picture, and that creates something for people to look at. And another friend in Peachtree City has really deep, deep shade. Has anybody got a lot of deep shade? And a lot of times, you've got a lot of green in there, but she added a pop of color by putting in this, staging a little area with some plants and a beautiful table. Another thing that a focal point can do is it can say, this is visually important. This is the important part of my garden. Now, does anybody recognize this? Yes, the parterre garden, the signature garden at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, the Chihuly waterfall. Now, if you didn't have that waterfall fountain, would it seem as important to you? But that makes a statement that says, this is important. This is her former home, my cousin's former home in Columbus. The pond, and the waterfall is very charming, but what makes it visually important? The statue in the middle, and that makes and one thing to notice about when you're thinking about focal points, the vertical is always something the eye goes to. So a large vertical focal point will always attract the eye. So that makes a bigger statement right here. This was a beautiful pond with a lot of greenery, but that statue is so charming that it makes people stop and say, this is an important view, this is important. And there you've got a homeowner's swimming pool, but they framed it with the arbor around it that makes it all balanced and makes it important. Another thing a focal point can do is detract from sort of an undesirable feature. We've all got those, don't we? And this was a friend who had kind of some broken down lattice, and behind that was all the trash cans. So she just put some plants in front of that, and your eye goes to the plants, and you don't really notice as much what's in the background. You have to be careful, though, with deflecting attention away, because sometimes you can draw attention. And I heard this story about this lady she had one of the city electric poles telephone poles in her corner of her backyard, and it really bothered her. So she grew a clematis vine around it. And what do you think happened when the vine bloomed? People said, I didn't know you had a telephone pole in your backyard. So all she did was draw attention. Nobody had noticed it before. So in one way to deflect, you might do something away from it a little bit to deflect attention from it. So you have to be careful. This may not make sense to you, but this was at a botanical garden I went to, and right to the right was their workspace. They had this big load of compost and all these tractors and things. So they tried to create a little vignette to the side that you would notice that was kind of charming, so that you wouldn't notice all the work, the stuff going on. A good focal point will direct attention to some element in the garden. I love this boulder. This is at the UGA Garden in Griffin. Where's the boulder pointing? To the right. It's going up. And this is a pathway, and there's like a meadow with flowers, and you might just walk that pathway and go right by it. But you see that boulder, and your eye kind of follows it to something that they want you to see. A bridge can direct attention to some other elements in the garden. This was a huge garden, but you may not have wandered back there. You might have thought, oh, there's just more trees. But that awesome bridge, don't you want to cross that bridge? You want to do that. So you're going to find that's exciting. It's going to direct you to something else in the garden. And here was just a group of ugly hydrangeas. And again, when you walk through a garden and you just see green, again, green and white, you may not pause, but you're going to pause because you see this focal point, this heart. I love this one. Now you see, you've got trees and you've got ferns back here. And again, you might walk past there, but because of that sculpture, what does it make you notice? Look at that wall. I mean, that is awesome. But your eye just totally misses because all you see is green, 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 green. You walk by. So adding the sculpture pauses your eye. And again, it's a vertical. And that's stunning, really. This is Melody's garden. A focal point should lead you down a path further into the garden. When you go to public gardens, one of the things they're always trying to do is get you to go further into the garden. And they do that with pathways, but they do it also with focal points. If you see a path and you want to follow it, you want to see something in the distance that interests you. So a good focal point is going to take you on a journey through a garden. And even in our smaller gardens, we should be taking people on a journey where they're going to get into our garden. If somebody just stands at your backyard and looks out, oh, what a nice garden, you haven't compelled them to go out. So you want to find a way to make your garden a journey. And you see here she's got her cool little sunflower stepping stones that take you to her greenhouse. And again, here's another pathway. And as you're walking that pathway, you see that piece of art down there, and you want to continue on that journey just to see that piece of art. And that's the focal point. This is my garden, and to get people to go up the stairs and further, everybody wants to go through an arbor. They just always do. You just want to go under an arbor. So it's a good focal point to take you farther into the garden. And this was a simple one, another arbor, but you see the bird bath in the distance, which is the focal point. Now this is, has anybody ever been to Ladue Topiary Garden in Maryland? If you ever get up to the Baltimore area, it's spectacular. It's all in block topiaries, but it's a huge green space. And again, if you're walking by on a path and you just see these trees and grass, okay, it's beautiful. But see how they placed that gazebo at the top of the hill? What does that make you want to do? Don't you want to go up there and check it out? So they're drawing you further into the garden. If you didn't have that, you may not have gone up there. Now, of course, we're not going to have those spectacular gazebos, but we can always place a bench or a sculpture to bring people up. Simple. Just this wooden bridge across the creek draws people farther into the garden. Are those cool kind of stick arbors? I don't know how they make that, but don't you just want to go under that? You just want to go farther in. This is the Ladue Garden again, and I think that topiary up there is a Buddha, but you see that the pathway is framed by the arbor, and you see the pathway with the ferns on either side draws you around, and you don't know what's on the other side, so you want to keep moving. A good focal point will also invite lingering. Now, if you're like most gardeners, you may have a bench somewhere in your garden, but you never sit in it. Because the second you sit in it, you see the weeds, or you see something that needs to be done. I mean, that's just how we are. We never really sit and enjoy our garden. But we should provide places to linger for those that come and visit us. And you never can have too many garden benches. Now that's my mom and my uncle, who, bless their hearts, are deceased now. But you can see that swing in my cousin's backyard, just a place to linger, and it's a perfect focal point. And that's the same swing in another location, where not only does she have a beautiful swing, but then she's got the jasmine that's blooming, and you create a wonderful focal point. A pathway leading to a seating area. So these are just a few of things you can do that are focal points, but also places for people to sit. Focal points, they're about your life and your family and your history. So you ought to create things that are nostalgic to you, familiar to you, old objects, things that nobody wants but are treasures to you. Make them focal points. And then one of my friends, that's an old wheelbarrow from her father's farm, and it's rusted out, but boy, why not plant something in it? Not only is it a really nice focal point, but it reminds her of her history. When I first started gardening here, I had a dilapidated side fence. It still is that way. I haven't done anything to it in 19 years. But I covered it with old farm equipment. My husband grew up on a farm, and so did my father, and I had all this rusted farm equipment. So I just put it across the fence. Not only does it tell a story about my history, but it makes a great focal point as people are entering the backyard. If you've got old pieces of pottery or old things from your grandmother, estate sales, or to make little garden totems, then you've got stories to share with people when they come to your garden. An old rickety ladder, a great place to put pots. And it's a nice, thoughtful addition. Now, this may not look like a focal point. This is actually my back deck, but the chairs, the big chairs on the end my husband made, but the four chairs in the middle, do you remember those old maple dining room chairs? Yes. Nobody wants anymore. And that had the harp design. Does anybody remember that? Well, that was in my grandmother's house, and we all remembered going there, and that's where we would eat. And then my cousin told me one day, I've still got grandmother's old chairs, and I'm just thinking of getting rid of them. I thought, well, no, I'll just paint them and put them in the garden. So, I mean, they are starting to rot, but they make me smile, and they make me remember my grandmother, and it's a story I can share with other people. A focal point also can give you a sense of cohesion, balance, repetition, restraint, pattern. That's particularly a formal garden. If you know how a formal garden is, it's very structured. So here you've got the sundial, and then you've got the balance of these smaller garden beds. And the sundial, obviously, and then the arbor, the white arbor, become the focal point. And there's another one that's informal but formal. The flowers are kind of informal, but you can see the pattern and the sculpture are formal. Now this looks a little wild and crazy because I had these, it's a huge patio, but I put a picture, I zoomed in on. This is my cousin's courtyard in Columbus, which is sort of like a Charleston or Savannah courtyard. But what together? What makes this all together a focal point? Pardon? The geometry? Yes, because it's patterned. Okay, think about the color as well. Sometimes things that are the color can by itself be a focal point. And her color scheme is always black, white, and this chartreuse, this lime green. And when she puts them together in a pattern, you can see that it kind of all works. And her plants are the same too. It's just amazing. Different kind of herb gardens. You've got your statue there, but everything is a pattern. Everything is restrained, very formal. A focal point can reinforce a mood, a theme or a mood. What do you feel? What's the mood you feel like when you see this?
Peaceful.
Pardon?
Peaceful.
Peaceful,
Calm.
calm, sort of days gone by, going home. This barn in the back there, the people that owned this land before, it's now owned by the Southern Conservation Trust. They had a train garden, and you can see what the train went through the barn doors and came out. But if you see here, you've got actually two focal points. You've got the barn, and then what's your other focal point? You've got the stump. And don't remember that things in nature can definitely be focal points. You leave a big stump like that, and you just put a little statue on it, and that gives you another sense of kind of days gone by. Again, what is the mood that's being reinforced? Somebody had a wildflower garden in their backyard, and they just dumped this wonderful little wagon there. And it creates a sense of nostalgia. What does that say to you? How many had those chairs or the grandmothers? Yeah. Yeah, there's something very down-home and peaceful about it. But you put chairs together, especially odd numbers, where we love odd numbers, it becomes a focal point. You don't you want to sit there. A focal point can also create whimsy or fun. One of my friends in Peachtree City, her husband made her a pot man and put it on a bicycle. And this is right by our golf cart path. And you know, in Peachtree City, everybody uses the cart path. And so people walk by and they have a chuckle. But it's a beautiful, fun focal point. Now, this was kind of accidental. I was with Master Gardeners Fayetteville a few years ago, having our garden tour, and I was doing publicity, and I was going out, gosh, it was March or February, nothing's growing. But I was trying to check out the gardens to write up some publicity. I went to her, and she hadn't been in the backyard all winter. So in the meantime, the head had fallen off the statue. And we walked around the corner, and there's this headless statue, and look at the surprise on the face. And I started laughing, and she says, oh, I'm just gonna have to fix that. I said, no, don't fix it. I mean, that is a great focal point. It's unexpected. You turn the corner, and then you get a laugh. So think about things that can be kind of fun. You what? Oh, that's a good thing too, yeah. Fairy gardens, they're whimsical. This one is just a small one created in the bird bath. And then another one of my friends, she went to town. She's got a whole fairy garden community here with people and everything. And a fan of President Carter. I mean, look at his smile. That makes you smile. And that's a darling statue. Doesn't that just make you smile? And see, it's taking the place in an area that you might not notice. I mean, there's a beautiful sculpture greenery, but how much greenery do you just look at before you move on? But you pause there measuring cups or something that you hang on. But the point is, yeah, they're very low. But it's surprising. Not only is it a cute focal point, but it's something that's going to make you laugh. So think about it. There's a place in Sonoy that used to be a bed and breakfast. It was a church originally, and they bought it, and now it's a private residence. And they didn't want people going up the steps. That was like one part of the sanctuary where they had, so they grew creeping fig on the staircase. Well, that becomes a focal point with all the pots and the creeping fig, and it's kind of fun. And you know that you're not going to walk on. Another thing a focal point does is create mystery. I'm going next week, maybe some of you are, to this week, Savannah Garden tours. Anybody going? No? Okay, well you need to go sometime. But don't you, when you walk through Savannah and you see those gates and you kind of peek in and you see the mystery, you just want to go in there, right? There's something about a garden gate that creates mystery, a pretty garden gate. And that's something to think about. If you've got a place where you can create a garden gate or something that says, I want to go in there. And this is the guy in Peachtree City. He just put a door at the end of his path. And it's a view of Lake Kedron. But I think that's kind of clever. It creates some mystery. You think, what is behind the door? There's really nothing behind the door, but the lake is there. But it's a focal point, again, it's vertical, and it draws you in farther. Another pretty one of an ornate gate. Okay, where do you place a focal point? Now, I apologize for this picture, but I put it in here because it was my first attempt at doing a focal point. You know, what the idea is, looking out your windows, your patio, your deck, there should be something of interest to see outside of all your major windows. I don't mean like a bathroom or something, but something outside, or your guest bedroom. So we had a little bit of snow one year, and I had all of these deciduous plants, and this is outside my dining room, so I just stuck this pedestal with a globe on it. Well, it gave me something to look at all winter. And it's not that great, but still, it's a focal point because everything else was kind of really ugly. So you look outside and you think about, what can I put out there that will be pleasing for me to look at? Sit on your desk. What would you like to see in front of you? Walk down your garden paths. What interesting piece could you put there? So it's really surveying your garden. What's interesting, when we moved back to Peachtree City, I was looking for homes in February where there's not a lot of, beauty in the garden. But I went to a house and we opened the front door and I had a line of sight back all the way through the house to the back patio door, and there's a pond with a waterfall directly as you open the front door. I mean, that sold the house for me. Not only did I love the pond in the backyard, but the idea that they had created this line of sight when you walk in, that you could see that immediately. Look at your house from the street. What would you like your neighbors to see? And I love this, where they created, this is the sidewalk, they created all of these pots right there on the sidewalk. Not only can they enjoy it from their porch or their house, but the neighbors can enjoy it as they walk by. And then again, when you mass pots together, that becomes a focal point. So you want to think about angles and placing a focal point where it can be viewed by several directions. What can a focal point be? How am I doing on time?
You're good.
All right. Okay. It could be something you love. Now, when we moved into our house and our garden, they had left this old dilapidated bench. I did not dare to sit on it, but I loved it. And so I just put a pot on it, and it was my focal point when I started out, and it's gone through several changes over the years, but something you love. I mean, these two little boy and girl concrete, those are mass produced. They're nothing special, but I bought them when I first started gardening because I have a son and a daughter who were little then. So I take them everywhere with me when I moved, and they're something that I love, and they become the focal point. And again, you see here where you're working in threes, where you've got a higher focal point, which would be the bird bath with the angel, and then you've got your two on the sides, sort of balance things. A friend of mine had a collection of gazing balls. She didn't just set them in the yard, she put them on poles, and they became great focal points. Trains. Anybody got a train garden? That's all you need to garden if you got a train. And I tell you, I've seen some spectacular train gardens, which in itself is a focal point. One of my friends, Cindy Dale, has a fabulous rose garden, and probably more than 300 varieties. They take center stage in the spring, summer, and the fall. But she was wise in that for the winter months, can you see the fountain back there? She created a focal point and the sound of water. So not only was it beautiful during rose season, but it gives them something to enjoy in the winter. A tree, a specimen tree, this is a bonsai tree, can become a focal point. That's all you need, isn't it? Now, Gibbs Gardens, you've got two things going on here. During the fall and the spring, what becomes the focal point? Those Japanese maples. And then the Monet Bridge, sort of like Monet's Bridge, it sort of frames the Japanese maples. Then when they're deciduous and they drop their leaves, then the bridge becomes the focal point. So they use two concepts here, which is really quite beautiful. But everybody needs at least one big Japanese maple as a focal point because they're spectacular. Showcase plants. If you mass plants together during their blooming season, they become the focal point, like these hydrangeas. Again, we've got the Japanese maples, the spectacular color. And even in the winter, there's certain Japanese maples have all that twisted trunks and textures. It gives you something interesting to look at. That's my Japanese maple. It's not the best picture. But the point is, when my next door neighbor said, I hope you never cut that tree down. I mean, they love this tree. They drive by, it pops, the red pops so much that is the signature focal point. In my garden, where my pond is, the water lilies take center stage in May and June when they're blooming. Other than that, it would just be my pond and the waterfall. And that's my pond. It's a kind of an older version of it. But that's what I can see from my front door through the patio, sitting on my deck. I mean, the guy that we didn't build it, the line of sight was just perfect. Water features. Everybody needs some kind of water feature. Now I have it's not a big pond, but it takes some maintenance, I'll tell you. Well, you don't need to have something like that, something simpler like a bubbler, because the sound of water is magical, and it sets a tone in the garden. So find a place where you can add some type of water feature. That's just a simple bubbler, but a beautiful container, and that's the great focal point in this backyard. And this is Cindy's rose garden again. You see that roses are starting to fade a little bit, and you can see her fountain, which adds the music of the water, and then off in the distance she's got another sculpture. This is again the sculpture with my cousin's pond. And a pond with fish, that becomes a focal point. When you think about koi, goldfish, the movement, the flash of the color, it's mesmerizing. People will stand there for hours sometimes looking at fish, so it's something else to think about. This one is so cool to me. When a friend of mine, she had quite a large garden. It was almost all a shade garden. As we're walking around one of the paths, you could hear this kind of tinkling water sound in the background. I had no idea where it was. So you continue down the path, you want to find it. Then all of a sudden you turn a corner, and hidden in this Fatsia japonica is this tiny little water feature that's just dripping water. Well, what did it do? It drew me into the garden. I wanted to find it. So even if it's a little secret place, it makes a difference in the garden. Garden seating. Now, wouldn't you like to sit there? That just pulls you in. The thing about garden seating is it becomes a sculpture, even if you don't sit on it. So the little bit of winners we have, you can see how that adds to the seat. And that's my cousin's house again. But don't you want to just go there and relax? It's just all old, and that's just old. Those are old chairs, lounge chairs and beach chairs from a pool at the Holiday Inn when it closed. She bought the old furniture, and then she had it what do you call that? Restrung, the webbing, and added these things. So it wasn't expensive, but it really makes a difference. This is at the University of Georgia. It was, it's the kind of the weeping, all the trees and the plants are weeping, cascading. This was in honor of Vince Dooley, who was, our coach. And it's sort of very zen feeling with that seating. So just some different ideas of garden seating as focal points. Even something as simple as a log around a tree. Oh, and that's the same furniture that Susan had in another house, in another rendition, different webbing. And that's her swing here, and that is here. So you can, the things about swings, so you can move them around benches to wherever you need them. And again, look at this, plain, simple Adirondack chairs and old chairs, but look what the snow does and how it makes it a focal point. I act like we have snow all the time. This is probably my favorite one. I met a gentleman, he was on the Glen Botanical Garden tour, the Mother's Day, have y'all been to that? Oh, yeah, it's wonderful. Well, I asked him if I could come back and do a story on it for Georgia Gardening Magazine, and he has this bench with lichen all over it, and it is spectacular. And to me, that there's nothing else you need. That is so, I don't know if you're going to sit there, but it's beautiful. Interesting containers. Now, I like face pots. Does anybody else? Yeah, they're kind of fun. In fact, Melanie put me on to him. Carlos in Palmetto. Is Palmetto my favorite? Has anybody been there? Yeah, he's I bought him out. So these can be fun, whimsical, charming. People are drawn to them. They make great focal points. But it doesn't have to be a pot. It can be a pumpkin. If you think about creative ways to do containers, anything that holds water can be a container. So think about that. So if you have your grandmother's old pot, put a hole in it, put it out in the garden. Now that is a beautiful restrained container, but it's making the point again, you might have walked by, but you saw that container, and doesn't that make your eyes stop? So if you think about those places in your garden where you have a wall or you don't have a lot of interest, and you add a pot or something like that, it's going to make a statement. Just some more different ones. Using a bird bath as a container. And generally with containers, the bigger the container, the bigger the impact. So where does this go? It's the sky. So you've got a big area. So the bigger container that you have, the bigger the impact that you have. And this is interesting too, just creating something different in the fall. When my dad died, my mom kept his boots for years and years, and she finally said to me, gosh, I guess I'll just have to throw these out. I just potted them up and put them in the garden, and it made me smile. You know, it reminded me of my father. Now, they did rot over the years, so I had to throw them away, but still used them. A bird bath again. Using watering cans as containers. We saw this one before about massing them together. Window boxes are containers. You know, they use them so much in Europe, we don't use them here much, do we? And they really do make a wonderful statement. So think about, and those rail, you can also do those rail boxes. See how pretty those are. And here I love the containers because they're all different, but they work. You've got the raised bed, which is very rustic. You've got this very contemporary container, and you've got your hedges. But all together, they make a really pretty statement. Melanie, I'm using you a lot. If you have a wall, a bare wall, and you mass things together that tell a story, I mean, that's beautiful. Again, massed plants together make a big impact. A bottle tree, you have unusual things. I love this, I saw this in a garden. If you would be happy all your life, plant a garden. Well, I didn't, there were others. The first step said, if you'd be happy for a week, marry a wife. And it said, you'd be happy for a year. The next one said, kill a pig. I'm not sure why. But if you would be happy for your lives, plant a garden. But isn't that great? I thought that was wonderful. My friend Faye in Fayetteville, she'll use anything as containers and create these little vignettes. So here she has these old, she goes and buys old trucks and cars, and then she plants them. There's a broccoli growing in an old tub. This is pretty interesting because this is a narrow space, a dark space. So they have a potting bench there, but then they put a mirror there. And what does the mirror do? It reflects light, it brings some light, and it makes the garden a little bigger as you look into the mirror. And one of our friends in Sonoy, they just bought a wagon and they decorated for every season. And that's what you see as you come into their yard. I love this. This isn't the Land Botanical Garden, it's a shade garden. Are you going to notice those ferns? Why do you notice them? The stump cut on the diagonal. Something so simple, but it makes your eyes stop and it gives you a chance to appreciate the greenery. Old chairs. Have y'all potted chairs before? Yeah, it's fun to do. And this is my grandparents' old, what do you call those? Franklin stoves. They used to be out on their little screened-in porch. And after they died, all this stuff sat for years. And they were gonna, I don't know what they were gonna do with it. So I just took it and I put plants in it and set it in the yard. And again, it reminds me of my grandmother, but it also gives me a story to share when people ask about it. We saw that before. This is the most unusual focal point I've seen. a home in Columbus. There's a grave, there's an actual tomb, there's somebody buried there. So this person, they keep the grave, I can't read the 1886. Wow. Pretty cool, huh? So they plant around it, but they make it a focal point in the garden. And this is my grandmother's old table from her sewing machine. Do you remember those? Well, we're getting down to the end, but again, using things that are structural and are vertical, like the arbor, are always wonderful focal points. I love that gate. Somebody could make that. But it frames, what these pieces do is they frame something. Have you ever even put a frame, an empty frame out on a board and you just frame a scene? I've seen that at garden tours where they'll just frame a scene with an empty frame. So these are just some trellises ideas. What do you call that again? It's got a French name. Popular? Maybe that's it. I can't remember. We're all getting old now, right? And see how that's framing the distance and the distance from it? So these are just some statuaries and sculptures. Whimsy, remember Whimsy? And this is out of a basement window. You think about having something outside everything, even your basement window here, somebody created a little vignette. And that's at my pond, and I've got that little boy just looking at the water. Somebody's fast. Again, that's Sydney's rose garden, and adding that statue again makes you stop and really enjoy the roses. That's you, Melanie, right? Yeah. Is that what Carla's too? Birdhouses. We'll go through this real fast. But birdhouses, nothing is more vertical than a birdhouse, right, on the stump. So they make great focal points. And again, they become like a sculpture in the wintertime. Garden sheds. Has everybody got a garden shed? Why? You don't need to just have a utilitarian shed. You can bling it up. Now this is a basic shed you might get at Home Depot or something, and look what they've done to it. And every garden shed like this becomes a focal point. One of my friends, George Long, his grandparents, I think it was in Mississippi, owned a country store. And he took a lot of the stuff from there, like the signs and all, and he rebuilt a little replica of a country store, and that's where he stores his tractors and all his garden equipment. But then again, it tells the story of his family. A little she shed. That's our garden shed. And Dan made a side part where to bring in the lawnmower and everything. You gotta make sure you got a door big enough for the equipment. And this was just like a little outhouse. So there's all, I mean, there's so many beautiful ones. All right, well, I'm going to go through this fast. Mass plantings, we've already talked about this, but look at this here. This is a home, a Victorian home on Mackinac Island. Have anybody ever been to the Proven Winners seminar at Mackinac Island in August? Another thing you must do. They do a garden tour of all the private homes of all these Victorian homes. Oh my gosh. The plants are massed together, the colors to complement the house. But the house is really the focal point. and the color of it. But doesn't that all work together? Yeah, this is, so I'm acting on an island. But just anything that you mass together becomes the focal point. Plantings and geometric shapes. We talked about this before. Somebody, I want to see somebody do this. Create this knot garden. These are more the formal type of gardens. Even going out vertically. And have make a little maze. All right, final tips. If you're purchasing something like a big sculpture or anything, go for as much quality as you can, because you want your family to fight over it when you're gone. I want that Lake Madonna or whatever. And consider style. If you have a formal house, or you're more formal, or your plantings and maybe more formal urns and statues, or you may go for the informal with a lot more whimsy. And think about, if you don't know where to start one little area where you pick a theme and say, oh, my theme is going to be cottage garden, and I want to take this little area and I'm going to create something that will become a focal point. You don't have to do the whole garden at one time. Consider the size of the piece, and we talked about that size does matter in the garden. And that you thinking about the scope of the trees and everything, so large pieces, large pots look great. And if you need more height, to get pedestals or tree trunks that are cut off, and keep those tree trunks when you get rid of those pine trees or whatever, and you can set things on those. One last thing about a garden vignette. To create one of those is a three-part thing. You have a primary focal point, you have a secondary, and then you have the plants. So, I don't know if you can see this very well, but here would be your primary, the little bird bath. Then you've got a bird house, and then you've got the plantings around it, and it kind of is balanced. So you could start like that in just a little section and say, I'm going to create the plantings and two ornaments together to create a focal point. Now that's that bench that was falling apart. This is my new, I get excited. We won 2 national championships back to back. Can I say that? Oh yeah. They're not any Alabama fans here. So I have my little Georgia vignette. I got my bench, I got my little whirligig, and I got my red flowers. Okay? Just another idea of a little garden vignette. Just something simple where you can start. Keep a file, start small, let your personality shine. I get real ticked off at some of these designers that say you can't have a flamingo in your yard or a gnome or something. If you like it, it's your garden, let your personality shine through. And that's it.
Thank you.
Without falling off the edges. So I always sometimes think about if you set 2 people together, like this, and make the path about that big. Because if it's too short, people are falling off, it really gets, it's better to have a wider path than too tiny.
How do you transition to a path? I know that you have a focal point. You've got one path, how do you get a transition to the other path?
How do you get a transition to the other?
The path that I have wanders around my house.
Well, it's good to have a wandering path. focal point. Or else create some privacy by hiding some of the path with some shrubs or trees or something, so that it creates a little mystery, and then as it turns, you can have a seating or something like that. So plantings can help create screens and privacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bonnie. That was so good, and I think most of us, I know tomorrow morning, I'm going to walk around my yard and garden with a whole different perspective and start looking for some more ideas to create some of these examples we've seen. We'd like